And welcome to the Midday Show. I am Jeff Everett. He is Mark Messina. Roe v. Wade overturned. We're going to talk about the implications of that, forecasting what could come of that, what's the fall going to look like, and then dive into some trending now. Before we get to all of this, the question everybody's waiting for, it's Friday, so there should be, I'm expecting something big here. Mark, how are you feeling today?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything big. I was going to try to force through and not eat until after the show because, I'm on this intermittent fast thing, and then I wasn't going to make it. So I ran over and I just shoved an Italian sausage, with peppers and stuff down my throat. So I'm feeling better than I did like 15 minutes ago. Is that the answer you're looking for?
Are you still doing the intermittent fasting? Like, are you
Mostly.
like kind of, okay.
I mean, I'm not like religious to it, but what it's really done for me, and I know we've talked about this multiple, it's just stopped me from, it's 11:30. I walk through the kitchen, I'm going to grab 3 Oreos just because they're there. And that's where it's really helped me.
Yep. I totally get it. I got on, I said, what do you want to talk about today? And you said, we got to talk about Roe v. Wade. Not to put you on the spot, but I will obviously hand the baton off to you first, because as always with Roe v. Wade, there's a lot of meat on the bone, a lot of different things to talk about with it. So I will hand over the baton to you first and decide which direction we're going to head.
Well, there are lots of directions. The first thing I would just say is, when you look at the polls, and these are not, liberal polls. These are, Reuters and Quinnipiac and the Associated Press and stuff. The majority of Americans are in favor of abortion rights, to whether, the woman's choice, the doctor's choice. Now, then they disagree on things such as, like, the biggest question is how long into it can you have one? But the woman's right to choose, is the majority of Americans are in support of it. So I don't understand how that we as a society, we think today we made an advancement.
Can I talk about that real quick? And I think you'll find this interesting, because it's going to go off into kind of what's going on in the economy, but you'll understand how it relates to deciding to overturn Roe v. Wade. I actually was listening to something last night that was really, really interesting about how the government decides.
Okay, first of all, let me jump in. You did last night was the NBA draft. Don't pretend you did anything else.
No, I did. I was listening to somebody explain the way the government collects data for economics and for finances. And one of the things that they do is they have this thing, I believe it's called the CIP. But what they do is they hire people to go around with clipboards, and they go to local businesses, and they essentially try to convince business owners to take these surveys. And as I was listening to this, all I could think to myself was, what an insane way to do this in 2022. Like, we should be able to tell if we're in a recession or not. We have all this data from banks, right? I mean, literally just credit card machines and POS systems. And you think about how often the government bails out banks. The banks should just be giving that information over. Like, if the government wants that data to decide economic forecasts, or if we're in a recession or not, or do we need stimulus, that should just be handed over. There shouldn't be surveys. There shouldn't be people walking around trying to get small business owners to take surveys to decide this stuff. And so I think, like, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, like, how pointless is this? What a stupid way to decide some of this stuff in 2022. I think some of this is, you say, how does this happen? This is kind of what happens when you have 9 people in a room deciding something for the majority, because there's no way to know if those 9 people represent the people. It also is what happens when you have an archaic system where people stand up and cheer. We talked about this, when people stand up and cheer to show their approval, when people make speeches. So, like, when you say, how did this happen? I think there's just, even after listening to that last night, there's just so many archaic way and things we decided. I don't have the solution. I don't know how to make it better. Clearly, I think democracy and what we've figured out is probably the best system we've had. Doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. But, like, for Roe v. Wade, like, I guess I'm not surprised that this could happen in 2022 when I look at the way that we still do things in 2022.
Well, I think, I don't understand how, it's been this way for 50 years. It's been this way for a whole lifetime. And we've been progressing as society. Now with, where this is going to go down the road, the LGBTQ community is petrified that apparently Clarence Thomas is already coming after that. And I don't know what he's done, but I've heard rumors that he's already written things and wants to go. So I just don't see how that we feel like this is an advancement. And while we're so dug in on our side, to keep looking at the other side and saying, we're right and you're wrong, and we're right and you're wrong, is just there's going to be no advancement. So what was I going to say? There have been so many things that I read this the other day, because I didn't know the vote was coming today until it was announced. I saw this online. It says it's going to be weird if the Supreme Court ends a constitutional right to obtain an abortion, saying it should be left up to the states to decide, right after it just imposed a constitutional right to conceal carry of firearms, saying it cannot be left up to the states to decide. So that there also becomes interesting. I know that the groups are going to say, well, if the state wants it, the state can have it, and it's back to states' rights. It is such a touchy topic right now. The two topics of Supreme Court debate are firearms and abortion, and I don't know. It's a strange day in society. I think it's a sad day in society, and I just don't know how the right thinks that this is progress. That's what I just don't get.
It's the timing of it. Certainly, I can't think of the right word, but the timing of it is like we're coming off of 50 years of Title IX. I was just ranting to you a little bit beforehand about some of the Title IX coverage, but we're coming off of 50 years of Title IX yesterday, and now Roe v. Wade overturned. The timing is very substantial. One of the things that we had talked about is, you had mentioned that you think this could actually help the left, moving forward and stuff like that. But I said to you, I wonder, like you talk about collection of data and surveys and what are people watching and what do people know? And I said to you, like, I do wonder how many people right now understand the implications. I wonder how many people, because people have jobs, they have lives, like they have things. We're fortunate. We get to come on here each day, see what's going on in the world, and then we get to jab about it out loud and try to sort it out for ourselves. Most people don't necessarily get to do that. There's a handful of people that don't want to do that. So one of the things that you had said is, I wonder if this will pull the left to the voting booths. I wonder if this will shift the wave at all. And I said to you, like, I'm curious if people, will really notice, like really, truly notice. Obviously, there's strong support. There's women's support on that side of it. And I totally get that. I'm not saying people are oblivious to it. But I do wonder, like today, right now, how many people are actually talking about it, or how many people. I feel like going into October, this could be like thing number 10. And if you look like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this would have been thing number 1, thing number 2. So I don't know.
I can't, after 50 years of debate, and I can't imagine it's thing number 10. Now the gas prices are going to be thing number 1. I mean, that's of all the issues in America. I think feeding.
But you, like, here's the thing though. Like, I say thing number 10. When I say thing number 10, I'm not disrespecting Roe v. Wade. Like, I'm not putting down people who believe it's an important issue. Like, it obviously is. It's a human rights issue. What I'm saying though is, I like the way that we are heading. People are going to be worried about, where's their next meal coming from? How am I going to get to work, like with gas in my tank? And people are going to start looking for the factors that are involved with that, such as the war in Ukraine and other aspects. So, like, in my mind, I could easily see how this like falls to the bottom of the list of things that are on people's mind come October.
But
no
matter how you vote, the war in Ukraine ain't ending. And no matter how you vote, like if the Republicans win the Senate back, gas prices aren't being cut back to $3. Like, so there's the thought process of the Democrats are there now. Inflation is high now. If we vote the other way, it'll be fixed. But people are smart enough to know that's not how it works. But they do know that if you vote the other way, that
this won't get overturned either. This is the tricky part about this is like, I don't want to, like, I'm not sitting here implying that fighting for human rights isn't important. It is important. And people should absolutely, if they believe that this is wrong, they should fight for it. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this idea of, like, I agree with you. There's things you can control when you go into the voting booth. I don't know if this is one of them. There's not, like, you can't remove Supreme Court justices. Like, it's not like the 9 people in are the 9 people in, and you're not disrupting that balance with who you vote for this fall. It's not happening.
But it goes back to states' rights, and that does matter now.
Yes, so totally. Yes.
So who you vote for in your state, and
yes, totally. But it's not changing Roe v. But would you agree with me? It's not changing Roe v. Wade.
No. And
right.
it won't. I would suspect it won't for a while. It'll go back at some point. But the I mean, the thing. I mean, from a political standpoint, I think the Republicans were going to crush in November, and they just I mean, there are Republican women right now that are going to vote Democrat that just flipped today. And they not only are there Republicans that are going to flip, there are no Democrats that are flipping. That are like, yay, Roe v. Wade's going, and they've rallied the troops. Now, again, as you said, how much of a rally is it? By November, does it even matter? Has something else happened? I don't know. But if status quo had stayed, I mean, the Republicans were going to do great. Are they still going to do great? Maybe. Are they going to? I don't know. But this is they certainly lit a fuse. I would say that.
I think you could see a difference state by state, but still have like the national red wave that people are expecting even in 2024. Because I agree with you. Like, I think there's even a lot of conservatives that socially are more towards the center, but in every other aspect they are conservative. Like, you and I have talked about it. I consider myself socially more centered, but when it comes to other things, I find myself leaning towards the conservative side of things. So does that mean if I'm regardless of which side I'm registered on, if I go to vote sooner rather than later, if I'm voting for the state, do I lean center? Am I voting on things such as the result of overturning Roe v. Wade? I totally get your point. I just don't know on a national standpoint. Like, I don't know if it's going to shift. I don't know if it's going to matter given everything else that's going on.
We'll see. One of the things I also heard today from a Democrat, and I had never heard from the Democratic side, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is almost deified. Like, she is, it's the first time I have ever heard public criticism from the left about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that she knew she was old, she knew she was sick, she could have resigned when Obama was in office, and they could have replaced her with a Democrat, or not, with a liberal Supreme. The Democrats could have picked their Supreme Court nominee.
Sure.
She didn't. She tried to ride it out, and she didn't live long enough, and the sentiment now was that if there would have been another Democrat and it would have been 4-4, then what's his name? Is it John Warren? That it wouldn't have gone the way it did, or might not have gone the way it did. And that is, I never, ever, ever thought I'd hear any criticisms of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but they're like, she blew it. She should have retired when she knew she was sick and she knew she was old, and she knew she should have known she wasn't going to live forever, even though some people think that. And she cost her side dearly. And in looking back now in hindsight, that will probably be her. I mean, she's done so many things, but her lasting lesson that she will teach to each side is, if you're sick and you're old, you retire when the getting's good, so you don't hurt your side.
I think both can be true. I think everything that you just said can be correct, but I would totally, I understand somebody saying, like, you can't dictate, like, nobody knew she was going. I know she was old. I know there was ideas of implications that her health was off, but you can't, I don't know. Like
Didn't
I
she have
wouldn't be
cancer on and off?
on and off, but I mean, people have it. They beat
But
it.
she was in her 80s. And
I
here's the
understand
thing
that,
too.
but there's like listen, like that's such a like you and I, like I'll just say it out loud. Like we thought my mom might be dead 16 months ago and she's kicking butt. Like you just don't, I don't know. Like you just don't know with that stuff. So that's my point.
Guess
I see both sides. That's one of those cases where I get somebody being upset at her, but I also understand, like, if she wanted to stay on, this idea that she wasn't, I don't know, the idea of her predicting her death and that's the reason she needed to give up her post. Not only that, like people would argue she was good at her post. So the idea of giving it, I don't know. I see both sides.
Well, and I do understand that even on election day in 2016, going to the poll, nobody, Hillary was the favorite. And people thought Hillary was going to win.
Well,
so maybe
polling said Hillary was the favorite.
Polling said Hillary was going to win.
Yes.
So, yeah. So anyway, but it's again, and it is the first time I've ever heard criticism of her. I guess the very fair point. The question. Oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
No, I was gonna say it's a very fair point. I was gonna go off of one other leg. So if you had something to add to that, go for it.
Well, the thing that I would like to ask the people who are really, well, first of all, I'm trying to say things that aren't really going to get us in trouble. The religious right is way behind this, and every time if the religious zealots start making policy, then look out, because that is a very, very scary world that we would live in. I just wonder, as you read through it and they talk about things like one of the things I read that I thought kind of made it hit home is like foster care. They are desperate in this country for foster parents, desperate. And you cannot be a foster parent at 15. You can't be a foster parent at 16. You can't be a foster parent at 18. I don't even know if you can be a foster parent at 20. But yet, if you're some impoverished 15-year-old and you get pregnant, and now, depending on what state you live in, you have to have this kid, now what? Who's going to help this? I mean, because all these people are like, right to life, right to life, right to life. Okay, now you have a life. Now who's helping it? And now it just seems to me, unless there's a plan that I don't know about, the right to lifers are like, okay, you take care of the kid. So now you get a 15-year-old who's from, Batty. You've perpetuated the poverty cycle. And if there aren't programs in place to help these kids, and you've got kids who had no parenting of their own, let alone know how to be a parent on their own, can't afford to be a parent on their own, aren't old enough and sophisticated, and it just seems like the people are like, well, that's your fault. And then so they're like, make sure you have the kid. But then when you have the kid and you have no means or capabilities of taking care of the kid, then they just throw their hands up and say, well, that ain't my problem. And I don't see how that benefits society.
So you've made your stance very clear. It's very obvious which side of the fence that you fall on when it comes to Roe v. Wade and abortion rights. I have said to you, I've heard good arguments from both sides. I've heard arguments from both sides that have. What's that?
Give me one. I want to hear a good argument from the other side, and I'm curious.
You want me to defend the other side?
How does it make society better to have a single 15-year-old who's living in poverty?
Well, it doesn't. But see, I understand that. So I think this is where it gets into. I think what has happened is we have gone so far in one direction on this that it's no longer centered, because I don't think there's a clear black and white on this. Just my opinion. Like I said, I've heard great arguments from both sides. So I think what happens is once it starts teetering too far one way, now it's off balance, and now you can't even find the center anymore, and now you're in trouble when you're talking about this stuff. But I've also said before, like we've talked about this, I gave you the statistics on Twitter being like unbelievably to the left. Do you remember me talking to you? Like I was shocked at how to the left Twitter actually is when you sit down and look at the user base. You and I've talked about how like the squeakiest wheel, like the loudest, are the 10% all the way one direction and 10% all the way to the other direction. And so what happens is like the voices that you end up hearing about this subject are the ones who want the most totality, like absolute choices in this debate. And somehow we've gotten away from trying to get into the middle and trying to appease, I don't want to say like appease both sides, but there's ways to do this in which people can get what they need out of it, but you're still respecting the faith and beliefs of another person. That's my opinion of it. But we've gone like, the problem right now is we're starting to tilt towards one side too much, and it's making it, because some of this stuff is absurd when you go through and actually look at the math and the statistics. Some of the science behind it is actually like very, very damning. But I also like, I understand why people would want to fight for a life. Like there are people who there are people who were almost aborted and then they decided not to, and they went on to live this great life. And like people will tell you, like, I was almost an abortion baby and my life has been great. So I understand both sides of the argument.
No. And I get that, but there's also, because you don't hear the millions and millions and millions of kids who are born into poverty, stayed in poverty, had no poverty, went to a life of crime.
I get it.
No opportunity.
I understand that.
I mean, it's so, yeah. I mean, you can hear the stories about the people who left home at 15 and went to Hollywood to be a star and made it. You don't hear the hundreds of thousands of people who left home and went to Hollywood to be a star and never made it. Because, and it's like, so I don't know. It just comes back to, it seems
can I ask you this? Like, because obviously, obviously you're a registered Democrat. Like, is one of your fears is that states won't do the right thing? Like, in your mind, in your opinion, not enough states will do what you believe is the correct thing. Because if you thought states were going to do the right thing, the idea of Roe v. Wade, like I think Roe v. Wade was important, and I'm not saying it isn't. Like, I understand why people would want to fight for it. But if you thought the states were going to do what you wanted them to do, I don't know how much you would care right now that Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Well, the reality of
like there's people.
First,
there's people in different.
How many people?
Can I finish? Can I finish?
Go ahead.
Just last thing. Because there's people that live in different states all across the country right now that, depending on what state you're in, you're feeling fine today or you're feeling great today because a state's going to change something you want them to change, or a state's going to protect what you believe are your correct rights. So like, depending on what state you're in. So as a registered Democrat, from a national viewpoint, is your fear just states won't, in your mind, states aren't going to do what you believe is the correct thing to do?
Well, first of all, just to clarify, pro-choice didn't infringe on anyone's rights. If you're pro-life, then your choice is just life. Like, it's pro-choice didn't force anyone to have an abortion. Pro-choice gave you the choice. So the people who are religious, or the people who have a moral or issue to it, or the people who are whatever, then they just go through the. They don't need the Supreme Court to say you have to do this to make their moral obligation. But the problem of, like someone with means, if Pennsylvania got rid of it, New York's not going to. So you just go to New York. But you get the poverty people who don't have means, who don't have the ability to go. And so, yes, rich people will still be able to get abortions. If Donald Trump's, any relative of Donald Trump that gets pregnant anywhere that wants an abortion can go get it. It's the poor people who are going to suffer because they can't. And that's the thing too, that like all these people, one of the jokes, and I'm not blaming Trump for this because this is not but one of the things that people like, Republican Party and Trump is pro, they're like, how many abortions did Donald Trump pay for in his life? Like there are going to be Republican congressmen who still pay for kids and mistresses and all this to have abortions. They're just going to get them to some place that's legal. The other aspect is, in these other states, illegal abortions and unsafe, dangerous abortions are still going to take place. Abortions took place way before Roe versus Wade showed up. They're just not safe. They're not sanitary. They're not medically induced. So like, how does that help society?
So playing devil's advocate, let's every issue that you've brought up, like one of your biggest issues is this idea that once the life is born, it's basically like hands off. And so like, So my question to you would be, is this an abortion issue? Or if there were programs in place to assure that if a life is to be had, that they would be taken care of, would you have the same issues that you have? Or would it still bother you?
I mean,
Because I think that's a very fair question for anybody where that's like their key points are, well, nobody, like nothing happens afterwards. They're not taken care of. They have nowhere to go. They don't get the resources they need. If the resources were there, if programs were put in place, if we somehow, because the world isn't perfect, if we somehow did have a system that reciprocated that care,
I get what you're saying.
would you still feel the same way about abortion?
I mean, there's a point. I would feel better. But the other aspect is still, I'm a man talking about this woman's issue. And the reality of life is, obviously during pregnancy and after pregnancy, the role of a man and a woman are very, very different. And, men have the ability to walk away legally much easier. And I don't like, yes, of course, if there were better programs, yes, it would make me feel better. But at the end of the day, I don't know as a man that like, this is one of the issues where my vote shouldn't count as much as their vote. So
do you think, I've always gone back and forth about this too. Do you think abortion and pro-choice are two different arguments? Or do you think they're directly tied and you can't talk about one without the other?
I mean, they're obvious. I would say they're tied because
you think that they're tied together.
The choice is the abortion.
You don't think it's possible. You don't think it's possible. I've
never understood why the pro-life people aren't fine with pro-choice, because they have a choice. Your choice is life. It's like picking, regular soda or diet soda. And well, that's your choice. So if you think diet soda is what's going to kill people because, you read those reports, then just don't drink it. But you don't have to outlaw it, because there's people who love diet soda and there's people who.
I think one of the biggest issues is, I think for someone even for you and I, like pro-choice or not pro-choice, we can end up respecting the person's decision. But I think for most people, all right. But what I'm saying too is, I think that's the minority. I think there's people that say they're pro-choice until you don't make the choice that they would make. And then there's judging, there's casting.
Oh, and listen,
and
from the Democratic side, when we heard it all like my body, my choice, and then the vaccine came out, and they're like, it's not your body, you need to get the vaccine.
Right.
Listen, there's hypocrisy everywhere. And see, kind of the irony of it is, as much as I'm pro-choice, if I was ever in that situation, I would not want the child aborted. I would want the child born and then to figure it out. So, but again, your
situation is so and again, I'm not calling you out. Like, I understand you were just using yourself as a reference, but like your reference point is so different than somebody else's reference point. Mm-hmm. And so I guess this is what I'm saying. Even as to me, you're very clearly on one side, but even as you talk about it, I notice that you understand that there are ways to be we don't have to just completely go one way, and we don't have to completely be the other way. And I think that's the issue right now, is I feel like people feel like it's swaying too far into one direction. I don't think it's a question of we have to have this concrete thing of I don't think all of us morally need to decide if abortion is good or bad. I think what we have to do is find a middle center, and then hopefully people can make choices, and hopefully it's the best it can possibly be. But when people get anxious when it feels like it's swaying too far one way. And I think today there's a lot of people that feel like it's swayed too far one way. It didn't
sway for them, because no matter what side you're on, you could decide to have the child. If you are pro-life, you could be as pro-life as you wanted to be in your world. Here's one of the other crazy things. How many people do you know? Now, I know, and I'm sure maybe more of this is hush-hush. I think, how many people can you name that have had an abortion? This is such yeah, this is such a small, how many people go through their life and it directly affects them or their family? But I really think that and this is going to sound like I'm saying this just to score points or whatever. I don't understand how in this topic a man's vote, or take vote away. I don't understand how a man's opinion carries just as much weight as a woman's opinion when pregnancy is so much more of a woman's issue than it is a man's issue. And I just don't understand that.
I agree with you. Like, as far as the pregnancy goes, I think you're totally right. But again, like it goes the other way too. Like I've told you before, the first time we ever talked about this, I told you, like, I've been in rooms where women were like, don't talk. Like, you have, like, you don't, and I completely disagree with that as well.
I agree. I have an opinion, and I've, like, on this side, there's not a lot of gray area. Like,
right.
There's 1,000 topics where I'm in the middle. This one I am very, but I understand that my opinion, I should have the right to my opinion, but my vote doesn't count as much. And they're just like spaces where people are like, well, this is what the person should do, and this is what the person should do, and you're like, well, like, if you've never stood on the mound with the bases loaded and 2 outs, then don't tell me you've been there. And for any man, no matter how many kids we have, and no matter how whatever, like, you just don't. The connection between a mother and the child is different than the connection between a father and a child.
I think like most things, it's a bell curve, and I think the meat of the bell curve is what you're describing. But I also, like, I think there's times where, like, the man cares more. There's that rare instance where, like, the man's way more interested in what's going on with the kid than the mother is, and vice versa. So
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. And there are families where the dad is a better parent than the mom is. There's no doubt about that. But there's still something about the okay, I say vast. I'm going to put numbers to it. More so than not, it's just different. It is really, and I say this as a father who I try to be a doting father and all that stuff. It's just different.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think maybe it's because I'm younger, maybe it's because I'm a male, but I still find myself being able to understand, like, there's a gray to this, there's a bell curve to this, and there is, like, I understand, like, when you get on right now, people are upset, and I get, like, they should be. Like, if you believe in this human right, and this is, like, one of your causes, and to you this is, like, one of the most important things, I totally understand that fight. I will go back to what I've said before. To me, this isn't as much about, we've all had the abortion argument. Like, we've all fought this out. I don't think there is a conclusion. Like, we would have had a conclusion by now if there was one. And so what I'm saying is, on a day like today, I think it feels like it's swayed too far one direction. And those are the days where people are upset. And to be honest, like, should be upset. Like, if it goes too far one way, I totally understand why people are upset today. I have told you before. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think there'd ever be an aspect of society? I think this is, again, now I'm thinking out loud and speaking for women, and I shouldn't do that. But do you think there'd ever be an aspect in society where it would go the other way? Because this is very much obviously a man was there to impregnate, but then the man walks away and the woman, have to deliver. So
one of the things that I think people struggle with this conversation or this topic, like, as you've noticed, I kind of try to stay away on, like, the women's feelings of this topic. Cause, like you said, like, I'm not a woman, I'll never be pregnant. Like, it is what it is. One of the things I think people forget is, this is with everything else, there's always a deeper rooted issue. When you and I talked about guns, I said, listen, I have no problem having the AK conversation, but at the end of the day, like, there's a deeper rooted issue here, and it's paying politicians. Letting corporations pay politicians is a deeper rooted issue to the gun issue. It's the same thing with this. Childcare, medical costs, all this stuff are some of the leading industries in the country. There's absurd amounts of money to be made by forcing people to have kids. It's the truth. I'm not trying to take away from the human rights issue side of this, like, fight the good fight. I get it. But there is a financial fight here that, at the end of the day, until that part of it is taken care of, there's always going to be people polling for people to be born, whether people want them to or not. And that is the deeper seated, rooted cause here that nobody, again, I'm glad you and I had this conversation. I'm happy people talk about abortion. I think it's anything like this is worthwhile talking about. But the same thing with the gun conversation. Are you willing to then talk about the deeper rooted issues? And there are deeper systemic issues with this of why, like, when you say, why would this happen? There are financial things going on within our system that it is beneficial to people if people are forced to have kids. And that is a even deeper conversation that more people.
No, I get it. But the point I was going to make is, do you think we'd ever get to a point in society where if you had a guy who was the father and was a deadbeat father who didn't pay support and wasn't around, that the government would then mandated vasectomies for deadbeat dads? Do you think the government would ever do that?
No. Well, there's a comic who does this that goes along with your point. For women, it's the fight to decide what to do with your body. For men, it's the fight over your wallet and can you keep your money or not. And it's two different fights. One's a human right issue, so it trumps the financial issue of
but
men.
What women would, this is my
suspicion,
what women would say is you would never do that to a man.
Totally.
You would never dictate what happens to his body, because then people would say, well, that's you're taking away his right to have future kids. But the argument to that would be, you could get your vasectomy reversed. So as soon as you get back up to date on your child payments or whatever, but we know in a society, this is what I think women complain about, in a society still governed by men and ruled by men, that men will make rules on women's health care and women's bodies that they would never, ever, ever do anything near like that to themselves.
Correct. And judges will make choices on men's wallets that they would never make ordinarily on a woman's wallet. So listen, I'm not saying one isn't a bigger rooted issue than the other. Clearly, the human rights issue is a bigger issue than like the court costs and fine costs and like child support payments of men. I totally agree with that.
I've known women who paid more in child support.
Correct, but it's a bell curve, right? Like it's like I'm telling you right now. I've done the numbers because I had to do it with Carrie for the one. Remember the story like a year ago with the whole issue? Do you remember this or no?
No.
And now that I'm speaking, you're just completely.
You said remember that, and I went to Titans, and I didn't. I kind of lost it. I don't remember the story.
We actually had to look this up, and like Lycoming County was actually one of the worst. Where because of the way the system works, they want people to have to pay child support. Like they want people to get fined and have to pay. It's what keeps the judicial system going. That's how the state makes money. So, but the point I'm making to you is there's no doubt, like there's a collective number of women who make more than men, like no doubt about it. And there's certainly some that get whacked at the court more than a man does. But in the bell curve of it, it is typically still the man to this day. So again, the human rights issue for women is a way bigger deal than the point that I am making. But what I'm saying to you is like in the comics point is like, the point you're making is totally true. We just live in a system where, like, for women, it's the fight is for control of their body, which is more important than men's fight for their wallet. But that's like when you're like a man would never, like, yeah, because for whatever reason, it's been determined that a man must be hurt financially instead of their rights over their body. Like that's just it's just the fact. It's the world that we live in. I'm not saying it's right. That's just where we live at.
You take it to the step further, and the women are saying, not only do I not get to control my body, but the man does.
So yeah, I get that.
And so you can understand why the women's rights groups are going to be slightly upset. And I say going to be like they're not already.
No, again, like I said to you, anybody who is fighting this fight and it is a just cause for them, I totally get it. Like I am not here to say anybody who is upset today can't be upset. I totally understand why they are.
And back to my original point, when whatever the percentage is, when 65, I mean, the majority of Republicans from the polls I read are in favor of abortion to a degree. Now, listen, and everyone has a debate on the late term abortions and things like that. And you know, obviously there's the extremes. There's the rape and incest on one end, and there's late term on the other end or whatever. But your typical right to choose, even Republicans favor.
I think with this, like I said, I really believe there's no conclusion. There is a middle, and right now it feels like it's swayed too far from the middle, and I understand why people are upset. I totally get that.
But you think it's not in the middle now?
No, that's what I'm saying. I thought are you not listening to me? Like that's literally what I'm saying. Back
to the middle.
No, not at all. Yeah, I think for some people this is very clear cut, and there is a solution. Like there is a conclusion to this debate and this conversation. And I am of the belief of there probably isn't. It's probably more like a bell curve. And if we, as close to the middle as we can get, is probably our best case scenario. And on a day like today, the majority of us would agree that it probably swayed more one way than the other. And for that reason, it's a rough day. So that's my opinion.
No, I'm with you.
Was there anything else we were going to talk? Because we did kind of forecast into the fall. We talked a little bit about what it could mean politically and that kind of stuff. So you wanted to mention the Genetti. That was pretty neat yesterday.
Yeah, it was neat. They had the 100-year celebration. We talked about it yesterday. We have an article up on NorthcentralPa.com. They did a lot of like Roaring 20s stuff. There were cars parked outside. They had bands inside playing, music from the time. People were decked out. We have a picture of some of the people that were decked out, and it was really well done. It's a neat place. There are a couple obviously we have Millionaires Row, and there's some really neat old architecture here. But some of the places downtown, the Genetti Hotel, the Community Arts Center, there's some really ornate old style pieces that are, I don't want to say maybe civic treasure. It sounds like an overstatement, but when you walk into the lobby of the Genetti, they don't make hotels like that anymore. And it's just, it's a neat place. And so it was a fun event. And you can look through the article and you can see the pictures. And, there were a lot of the owner, Gus, told a really funny story and about how he bought it and didn't have any money and bought it anyway. And so it was fun. It was fun. It was a good time.
The neatest part for me, because I didn't go to the event, but when I was leaving the office, I actually got to see the vehicles. They were lining them up and getting them all set up on the street. And that was really, really, really neat to just see that. And everyone, like you said, people were dressed up like it was, back in the day. And so it was just really, really neat. When you were walking by the Genetti yesterday, it actually, you did get to kind of time travel for like a hot second and kind of see something that you don't get to see every day. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was neat. So I'm sure you want to talk about the NBA. So go ahead, give me what you got.
It's funny. I don't have a lot to say about the draft. The Kyrie Irving stuff is still insane. I don't know if you saw, they came to an impasse on his contract. For those who don't know, Kyrie Irving plays basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. He decided not to show up for work half the time. In the last, I think 2.5 seasons, I think he's played less than a third of the possible basketball games he could play in. Now, the flip side of Kyrie Irving is he's big in social justice. He does a ton of stuff for his community and for communities across the country. So there is like a humanitarian side to Kyrie Irving. Like, I'm not sitting here saying he's like a horrible person, but he is a horrible teammate and he is a horrible coworker. And I think those are two fair things to say. I think you can be a good person and a horrible teammate, and that is Kyrie Irving. So anyway, they came in an impasse with his contract. They can't come to an agreement. So he then sent them a list of teams he would like to be traded to. Of course, they were like the best teams in the league. And so just like he hasn't played, nobody trusts him. They have no idea what his future plans are. And everyone's supposed to just give him all of this money and just go along with it. And he is a fascinating person for all the wrong reasons.
Let me ask you this. Because you've been because of basketball, like you're a basketball guy through and through, and you've coached it and you've played it your whole life, and you played it more than most, and you've coached it way more than most. Basketball is a different sport than, sports like football and baseball. In baseball, the coach makes the lineup, and you bat when it's your turn. In football, the coach calls the play, and whoever gets the ball, it's pass, it's run. Basketball is kind of one of these. Every trip down court, anyone can dribble, anyone can pass, anyone can shoot.
Sure.
What percentage of players do you think really become the me first, I'm a bad teammate? Is it really low, or is it higher than we would care to believe?
I would say this. I think it's harder than you realize to become that. I think most people innately aren't born that way. I truly believe
selfishly
that.
Or
born so like I think it's something that you kind of like. I know like the whole ego thing when you're a toddler and all of that. But if you watch like most kids, it's kind of like kids have to inherently learn racism. Like kids have to inherently learn, like it's been proven through studies that kids inherently learn a lot of this stuff. I think for a lot of people, like for ball hogs or for people like that. And listen, I went through a phase. Like, I'm not sitting here and saying it. Like, I probably, when I was like, probably like 13 to 15, I mean, I went through a phase where you couldn't convince me the best possession was me like controlling the possession. You know what I mean? Like, everyone goes through these phases. The difference though is I think most of us go through that phase when we're younger, not when we're a 30-year-old professional NBA basketball player.
How many of you, when you're a 16, 17-year-old high school basketball player, is it still,
I think it's
like one a team, or is it more than that?
it's totally situational. I think some kids, I think the hardest thing is if you're, depending on the program and the team and your teammates and everything else, I think most kids get it. I think what happens is there's kids that fall into a program where either the culture is bad or they're in a program where they have to do everything. The way that they're going to be successful is this one person carries them, and because of that, now that's a dead end. Like, eventually it's gonna catch up with you. And so no, I think the average kid, don't get me wrong, some kids are, am I allowed to say shithead? I'll say shit. Some kids don't get it, and but for the most part, I think kids get it. It's just, what's their situation, and do they have people supporting the right things?
Do you ever have kids that the kid doesn't get it, self-absorbed, selfish, and the parents are like good parents who the parents would not support it at all? They just can't.
Well, I'll say
I guess what I'm saying is when you've got the kid who's self-absorbed and you look at the parents, does it always say, well, that totally makes sense, now I know where he gets it from? Or does it ever go the other way?
I mean, there's a handful of times where that's the case. I will say this, and this is probably the trickiest thing about basketball, because the responsibilities in basketball are probably the least defined in any sport. Like in baseball, you play second base, here's your position, defend, like do this, do that. Basketball is unique in the sense, especially like the further and further it goes along, positionless, like everyone needs to be able to do everything. And so there's this idea with basketball that your role is not defined. And so you can kind of define your role. And so like we've had kids, like I've had lots of kids when they're like 15, 16, 17, their challenge isn't that they're a bad kid. Their challenge is like, for the first time in their life, they're being told like, you have to niche out what it is, how you fit in with this group. And how do you do that and where it is? The issue is like a lot of times coaches don't have time for that. So when they're 15, they just go, this is what you do, and this person's better than you, and this person's worse than you, and they define it for them. But then you kind of cap their ceiling and what they'll ever become. So the challenge as a coach is for 15, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, for like this 2-year, 3-year span, can you ride it out and put up with it enough where eventually they figure out how they blend in and how they fit in and that what they need to do? That's the hardest challenge. And listen, sometimes it doesn't work. Like sometimes kids never find it. But I think more times than not, if you're able to help them and guide them and let them figure it out, that's where we've had the most success turning a kid around who maybe didn't get some of that stuff when they were younger.
No, that's good. That's good. Well said.
Did that make sense?
Yes.
And again, it doesn't, I can't stress this enough. I am not implying it always works. Like it is. No. I mean, there are certainly cases where it doesn't, but that's always that aspect for me. I'll use him as an example because you and I both know him and he'll appreciate it. We had Eli Gare probably 2 years ago. And Eli, when he was coming up, when he was 14, 15, 16, Eli had an older brother who was very, very good. And Eli's biggest challenge was like in his mind, he could do everything his brother could do. And so Eli's challenge when he was younger was, if he wasn't getting to shoot the ball, he'd stop playing defense. If he wasn't getting to touch the ball, he'd stop running the floor. And it took 3 years for Eli to kind of snap out of it, realize I can affect the game in other ways. I don't have to wait for people. I can go get the rebound and play. Like it just took him a while to get it. And I feel like in a different scenario, he probably would have been pigeonholed into this little brother. Like, no, like you're not your brother. Like you need to go stand over there and just do your role. And instead, like he took his lumps. We certainly took our lumps. and eventually figured it out. And so Eli is one of those kids where when he was 14, probably didn't get it. But by the time he was 18, I mean, he was one of the best decision makers I had seen.
Well, what's interesting about him, and you just pick him out, is his brother was a super talent. His brother was a better talent, and his brother and him were a year apart.
Yes.
So when you look at, like in my situation, you know, my brother was a super talent, but he was a senior when I was a freshman. So we never really played together. I was on the baseball roster, but I wasn't on the field.
You had your own room. You had space to breathe.
So yes, it was never the two of us. It was him, and then he was gone, and then it was me. So those are interesting too. When you have siblings, are they close enough that they play together, or are they far enough apart that one's in junior high when one's in high school, and then they just kind of switch? So, but that's a whole psychology thing from another aspect.
Yeah, and it is like I think you and I talk all the time. Timing is everything. I'm really big on timing. Like, you probably get sick of me actually talking about how important.
No, but you're right.
I think timing is everything, and then I think situation, like just who came into your life at what time, and like there's kids for no fault of their own, a new coach, a new system, a new program. Like, we see it in college all the time. Like a kid will start when they're a sophomore, a new coach comes in, puts in like a new system, and all of a sudden as a junior, like they're riding the bench. And so I think a lot of the stuff that you and I talk about, in a perfect realm, it all makes sense. But the problem is there's so few of those. I mean, the way with coaching overturning now, and how often, you know, there's a new coach every year and all these different things. I mean, it just makes it difficult to have these unique situations where the environment is, it's not that it's perfect. It's just that the environment, there's like a river gets violent. A river has droughts, but it's there, and it's typically going the same direction. And so even in its worst moments and its best moments, the kid still knows kind of how the flow is going and what to expect. And I think all of the conversations you and I have, it's this idea of like the river is flowing, but there's so many situations for kids where that's not the case.
No, I get it. We really did. We had like 6 topics to talk about today that we had written down, and
some of them will
Monday, because
some of them we will get
because
to.
Roe v. Wade just dominated.
Some of them we will get to later, because I do want to talk to you about the rent stuff, because that's right up your alley with real estate and things like that. So I have some numbers, and then I also have some questions for you too that I want to ask you. And then we do want to talk about the Little League boundary stuff, because I think that's interesting. I want to do a little more, like I need to talk to some people so I can really like get a grasp on it. So we do have some stuff coming like Monday, Tuesday. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting. We may have an NHL champ by then. The Avalanche need one more win. I know you're on the end of your season. Tonight I did want to mention this. Tonight it's the Yankees won again. The Yankees won 15 games at home because they're never going to lose at home again. It's Verlander at Severino. Is that who the other one is tonight?
Is he still like one of the best?
Yes, he's awesome. Whoops, wrong click.
No, but like statistically, is he still?
Yeah,
one of
he had a bad outing. He's like 8-3 with a 2.3.
Okay.
He had elbow surgery and missed a year, but and he's 38. He's not. I mean, he's certainly a surefire Hall of Famer. But if you're a baseball fan, Yankees, Houston. I'm 95% sure it's Severino, but it is Verlander gone for Houston, and that'll be fun.
Nice. All right. Thank you guys for watching the Midday Show. Be sure to go to NorthcentralPa.com for all of your local news.
All right. We'll see you.
I'm Jeff Everett. He's Mark Messina, and we will see you.